My beautiful classmate mocked me for quitting high school. Years later, my son and I ran into her, and she insulted him, saying son of a high school dropout. My son replied, she's fired. Oh, he looks as dumb as you. I guess kids of someone who dropped out of middle school are also stupid, said a classmate named Catherine, who for some reason always looked down on me. She glanced at Ryan's face. Catherine was a Harvard graduate. She was good looking but had a terrible personality. That's what she said after looking at Ryan. I could tolerate being mocked myself, but it pained me when she insulted my son. Despite my patience, I raised my voice. His education level doesn't matter. Just because you went to Harvard doesn't give you the right to speak to my son like that. Seeing this, Ryan spoke in a cold voice, Dad, this woman. It's Mrs. Smith, right? Should we fire her? Ryan might look like he's 10, but he's no ordinary 10-year-old. Catherine would later come to realize this. My name is John, probably a very average 8th grader at that time. I was part of the soccer team, sometimes on the bench, sometimes not. Unlike the noticeable guys, I didn't have a girlfriend. Just an utterly average 8th grader. I had one strength and one weakness. My strength was math. I wasn't good at all subjects, but for some reason, math just clicked for me. I solved problems without much struggle, even if it was an advanced problem I saw for the first time. I was the only one in my grade who could solve some tough problems, and I had been holding the top rank in math since admission. I especially loved binary numbers. It felt romantic to count in a system other than base 10. It felt like a game and was very fun. On the other hand, my weakness, or rather, the person I couldn't stand, was a beautiful classmate named Catherine Smith. For some reason, Catherine treated everyone else normally, but she was cold to me. We used to play together in early elementary school and even visited each other's houses. But around our school trip in elementary school, she suddenly became distant and would only speak ill of me. John, don't slack off during cleaning. Come on, take out the trash, she'd say. It wasn't just me who was slacking off, but Catherine would say this and toss the trash can at me. John, don't just stand there. Put out the flame, you're so useless. Anyone could turn off the burner during our science experiments, but Catherine would always complain to me. Moreover, she'd say things like, I can't touch that alcohol lamp now that John has touched it, as if I were something dirty. I wanted to retort, but Catherine was bold, beautiful, and one of the top-ranking girls in our class hierarchy. I could never talk back and just took her remarks. I always thought that one day I'd prove her wrong, but the only thing I had over her was math. However, she was decent at math and was top of the class in overall grades. Throughout middle school, Catherine kept targeting me, and as fate would have it, we ended up going to the same high school. So, my high school life started with the same strength and weakness. Then, during my sophomore year of high school, my life took a 180-degree turn. My father, who was the backbone of our family, passed away. He loved fishing in rivers. One morning, while going fishing, he drove the wrong way on a mountain road and plunged off a cliff, taking his car with him. He never came back. Our family, which had been living a modest and peaceful life, was shattered. I can never forget my mother's face when she received the call from the local police. I'll never forget the pale face of my father when we rushed to the hospital. After my father passed away, my mother, who had always been a stay-at-home mom, decided to work as a temp. But she couldn't keep a job for long because the sudden loss of my father often made her ill. Just when I thought she'd been working for a while, she'd end up bedridden. She'd get better and start working again, but within about 3 months, she'd fall ill again. I couldn't put her through that anymore. I decided to give up on college. I'd even drop out of high school and start working right away. I wanted to bring my mom back to being a stay-at-home mom. I made up my mind the 3rd time she fell ill. Catherine, who always criticized me, confronted me when I decided to quit high school. What are you thinking? Are you out of your mind? Without a high school diploma, you won't stand a chance in society. You have just one more year of high school, don't quit now. Only a fool would drop out. Catherine strongly disapproved of my decision. But there was no changing my mind. I handed in my resignation that week and left high school by the weekend. After quitting, I first took a part-time job at a local convenience store. I'd never worked before, since my high school didn't allow part-time jobs, so every day was a new experience for me. It was tiring, but I had committed to supporting our livelihood, and there was no turning back. As I got used to the convenience store job, I began to work part-time at a British pub in the evenings. My mother, seeing the occasional burns I came home with, would cry, worried about my erratic lifestyle. Still, not everything about the job was tough. As I continued with my part-time jobs, a new chapter began in my life. There was a woman named Kate who worked as a server at the pub. Kate attended a renowned state university nearby, studying robotics. Kate and I started chatting a little more during the hours when there were fewer customers. It turns out robotics involves a lot of math, and I found the college lectures Kate shared with me really interesting. Gradually, I became interested in robotics. Whenever I wasn't scheduled at the convenience store during the weekdays, I'd go to the university with Kate and secretly attend lectures. The classes were challenging, with many unfamiliar theories, but I'd borrow Kate's student ID to study in the library afterward. Sometimes I'd wonder if I'd be attending that university if it weren't for my father's accident. But I found fulfillment in my busy workdays, and there was a sense of accomplishment in supporting my mom. Above all, experiencing my first love was wonderful. Kate, being 3 years older, seemed very mature. Every conversation with her was stimulating, yet when we'd stroll by the riverbank, her expressions were childlike and adorable. I wanted to protect Kate's smile forever. Update: My beautiful classmate, who looked down on me for dropping out of high school, told me one day, "My husband is a Harvard grad and a department head, not like you." So I responded, "Well, he's unemployed starting tomorrow." Part 2. After graduating middle school, I desperately looked for a job, but there were hardly any companies willing to hire someone with just a middle school education. The only place that hired me was a machine manufacturing factory where I work now. I've always loved tinkering with machines, so I threw myself into this job. I worked during the day and attended high school at night. Balancing work and study was tough, but I managed, thanks to the encouragement from my older colleagues. They taught me the ropes at work and even treated me to lunch sometimes, treating me like their own son. Years went by as I worked, supported by everyone. After finally graduating high school, I planned to continue working at the factory as an employee, but my senior colleagues advised me otherwise. "Now that you've graduated high school, try to study as much as you can," they suggested. They encouraged me to go to a technical college, telling me about scholarship programs and direct company support for employees. I was surprised and grateful for their concern, so I went to college. I chose a university department related to my company's business and gained strength by acquiring various certifications and researching specialized fields. After graduating from college, I returned to the company. A few years later, at 25, I encountered a turning point at work. I met Annie, who would become my wife. Annie was kind to everyone and had a lovely smile, and I gradually developed a fondness for her. It turned out that she was also interested in me. She asked me out on a date, and that's how our relationship began. A few years later, we happily got married and built a warm family together. Throughout such a life full of ups and downs, I had completely forgotten about being harassed in middle school. So when Sarah approached me at the venue today, I was genuinely surprised. Seeing my distressed look, Annie glanced at me worriedly. After I briefly explained the situation, Annie tightly grasped my hand. "No matter what anyone says, I know you're a wonderful person, David. Let's stay confident and enjoy the company's anniversary party." "Yeah, you're right." Encouraged by her supportive words, I squeezed her hand back. Thus, we decided to wait for the party to start. After exchanging greetings with everyone, the hustle and bustle finally settled down. Thinking of resting until the start time, I moved towards the wall with Annie. "Oh, you're still here?" There stood Sarah and her husband, whom I had just parted ways with. I was a bit surprised to bump into them so unexpectedly, but I sincerely congratulated her husband, Brandon. "Brandon, I heard you're an outstanding employee getting an award today. Congratulations." But instead of responding, Brandon just looked me over as if appraising me. "Is this the factory worker classmate you were talking about?" He had the audacity to attend the company's anniversary party despite being a mere worker. Sarah returned his words with a bitter expression. Then, Brandon, ignoring my presence, curiously asked Sarah, "But for a factory worker, he's wearing a nice suit." "I'm an elite, so I'm quite particular about suits. Even if he tries hard to wear a good suit, it's ruined because he's a lowly worker. It's truly embarrassing to have someone like him as a classmate." Frowning, Sarah spat out her words, and Brandon inquired further. "Embarrassing? Just imagine, he's been a factory worker since dropping out of middle school. That's 30 years of being a mere worker." "Wow, really? That's unbelievable." Sarah pointed and laughed at me, and Brandon leaned back, distancing himself as if amused. They both looked down on me with obvious disdain and then glanced at the person next to me. There stood Annie, watching the two of them intently. "So, this bottom-of-the-barrel worker, even though he's a dropout, managed to get married. What does your wife do?" Sarah asked me, and I answered honestly, "She works in the same field as me. We met at work." At that moment, Sarah and Brandon looked at each other and burst out laughing. "A couple both sweating it out in the field doing menial work. Perfect match for an incompetent dropout like you." They started mocking not just me, but also my wife. I couldn't understand how they could say such awful things to my wife, a stranger to them. As I stood there, stunned, Sarah blurted out, "But if I were you, I'd be too miserable to even mention working in a factory." "Yeah, for an elite like me, it's unimaginable to live such a lowly life." "Please stop talking like that," I retorted angrily to their cruel insults, but Sarah looked at me as if I were something dirty and turned her back. Brandon swatted me away as if swatting a fly. "If we keep talking to you, people might think I'm a low-class worker like you. Could you go somewhere else, Jay? Talking to someone lowly like you might rub off on me." I was boiling with anger at such rude behavior, but as a grown-up, I couldn't just let my emotions take over and start yelling. So I tried hard to hold it in. However, Sarah seemed to mock my feelings and hurled more disdainful words. "From now on, if you see us, don't come close, okay? My husband is a Harvard-educated director, way different from a lowly incompetent person like you." Her words, enjoying the harassment, brought back painful middle school memories. Back then, and even now, Sarah acted arrogantly, thinking she wouldn't be retaliated against. I felt like I heard the sound of my patience snapping inside. "Well, your husband will be unemployed from tomorrow." Sarah was taken aback by my unexpected words, staring with wide eyes as I stared back expressionlessly. She laughed it off, pretending. "My husband unemployed? What are you talking about? Have you lost your mind? Why would a mere factory worker like you have any power over my husband?" "That's because I'm the president of the company." "President?" For a moment, Sarah was dumbfounded, then suddenly burst into loud laughter. "You, the president? Don't be silly. Are you just saying that because my husband is a Harvard-educated director and you want to one-up him? It's not a lie." Yeah, Keep your fantasies to yourself, just like in middle school, I continued seriously, but Sarah clearly didn't believe a word. Then Brandon looked back and forth between me and Annie, standing by my side, and shrugged in disbelief. Married to a husband who spouts such fantasies? She must be quite a wife. Aren't you embarrassed to stand beside such a man? After spitting out those words, Brandon and Sarah haughtily left together. As I watched their backs, I trembled with anger. The person who had harassed me so much in middle school was still treating me this way, even now as an adult. And it wasn't just me they were mocking, Annie and my workplace were included in their disdain. I couldn't stay silent any longer. As I was about to step forward in anger to call them back, a gentle hand was placed on my shoulder. Annie. I heard everything, but it's not good to reprimand them here. But I couldn't just back down, especially after they laughed at Annie. However, as I looked at her, I was taken aback by her unexpected expression. She wore a mischievous smile. I have a good idea. Hearing Annie's plan, I nodded deeply, feeling a sense of relief. When the announcement for the party start was made, we moved to our assigned seats. The event began on time, and the employees started singing the company anthem. In my peripheral vision, I saw Sarah and Brandon singing along as well. After checking with the organizers, it turned out that Brandon was indeed being recognized as an outstanding employee and, along with several other distinguished employees, was escorted to a special seat with his family. Imagining what was about to happen, I suppressed a rising chuckle after the anthem. Update, my beautiful classmate, who looked down on me for dropping out of high school, told me one day, my husband is a Harvard grad and a department head, not like you. So I responded, well, he's unemployed starting tomorrow. Part 3. The entertainment part started, and there were performances by a magician and comedian summarizing a company's history in a skit, filling the room with a festive atmosphere. As the entertainment ended, the host led the applause and continued with the ceremony. Next, we'll have a speech from the president and CEO, Mr. Young, the host announced. Upon hearing those words, I began to walk slowly. As I stood on the stage, I looked over the gathered crowd, expressing my gratitude while everyone listened intently. Only two people were the exception, Sarah and Brandon. They were staring at me, mouths agape in shock. Even from the stage, I could see their lips moving. Why? Why is he speaking? It can't be true. He's the president? I haven't heard anything about this. I imagine that's what they were muttering. I continued speaking. Normally, we would now proceed to the ceremony for awarding outstanding employees. However, before that, I have an announcement to make. One of the awardees, the director who was assigned to our overseas branch, Brandon, will be dismissed from his position effective today. The room was enveloped in silence in an instant. As I tried to continue with a smile, the host approached me. What is your reasoning for this? The host asked, appearing confused. It was then that Sarah suddenly stood up and shouted, that's a lie. Everyone, this man was just a classmate from my middle school. He's just a mere factory worker. Why is he standing there? Yeah, this must be some kind of prank, but this taste in entertainment is terrible, right, everyone? With her shrill voice, Sarah spat out these words, and next to her, Brandon grinned smugly, looking back and forth between me and Sarah, bursting into a brazen laugh. The guests in the room started murmuring, enveloped in a tense atmosphere. I continued speaking calmly. Sarah just mentioned earlier that working in a factory is a lowly job. She also told me not to talk to her anymore, fearing that my lowness would rub off on her. So what? Sarah glared back at me, hands on her hips, still refusing to admit any wrongdoing. I work for this company. I cannot continue working with someone who is ashamed of our work. But my husband is an elite director, completely different from you. End this charade now, she demanded. At that moment, the executive director, Ethan, rushed to the award seat, his face flushed with anger, and started yelling at Brandon. Hey, apologize to Mr. Young right now. However, Sarah and Brandon, still half smiling, refused to believe Ethan's words. What's wrong, Ethan? Why should we apologize to some factory worker? He's just a lowly, incompetent worker. He's just trying to scare us by lying about firing my husband, Brandon scoffed. But Ethan shouted back, his voice trembling, state the name of our company. Young High-Tech Corporation, Brandon muttered. But Young. As he repeated the name, Brandon suddenly realized, and his face turned pale. His name. David Young. Could it be? He's really our company's president? At Brandon's words, Sarah froze in shock. During this time, I had been watching them, and judging that they finally understood, I spoke again. It seems you finally believe me, Brandon. His face ashen, he was shaking all over, hardly able to stand from his chair. In fact, I continued, Annie is the daughter of a major manufacturer that produces some of the leading semiconductor devices in the country. The company that accepted me, a middle school graduate, was one of her parents' factories. At that time, it was still a mid-sized company taking on various machinery productions. But 30 years ago, it developed its first proprietary product, a microcrater meter, and has since expanded its business with the advancement of electronic device technology. Now, alongside semiconductor manufacturing, we're collaborating with foreign companies to develop even more precise testing systems. Combining the knowledge I gained in college with a practical perspective, I actively participated in product development after graduating, resulting in several hit products. Thanks to this, I was transferred to the headquarters, promoted to director of electronic hardware development, and that's where I met Annie. Even after our marriage, Annie's family never spoke of my past, attending a night high school. Instead, they warmly accepted me as a diligent and enthusiastic young man, rare in this era. Wanting to repay this family and the company that raised me, I devoted myself to my work without distraction. Then, 2 years ago, when Annie's father retired, I took over as the president. Understanding the truth, Brandon looked like he was about to collapse. Ethan addressed him even more desperately. You were overseas, so you might not have known directly, but at least check the information about the company you work for. Brandon, his face still pale, tried to stammer an excuse, but Ethan, his face red with anger, kept yelling, "You're so caught up in being an elite from Harvard University that you don't even know the face of our president. I'm ashamed that I recommended someone like you as an outstanding employee." Ethan then grabbed Brandon by the scruff of his neck and dragged him in front of me. Ethan forcefully bowed Brandon's head and then joined him in kneeling down. I deeply apologize for the disrespectful behavior of my subordinate. Please forgive us. I'm so sorry for my ignorance. It's inexcusable. Brandon finally knelt down of his own accord, his face turning bright red as sweat dripped onto the floor. Annie, who had been watching this unfold, turned to me with a question. This was a plan Annie had come up with, I thought. David, what will you do now? You've revealed the truth in front of everyone to avoid being accused of unilaterally firing an employee, she asked. Yeah, well, he's fired, I responded. Someone who insults a person they've just met like that definitely doesn't fit in with our company. As I said this, Brandon fell silent, his forehead dripping with sweat.